Hi, everybody, and welcome to another segment of Between the Line Book Talk. Today we have with us Kimberly Brouillette, and she is an editor. And we've always wanted to pick an editor's brain, and we found one that wanted to be our guinea pig today. She's very busy though. It's really hard. It was really hard to get her.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry about that.
And you know, I am not I'm a writer, so the editing world is a little bit to me. So I think Kimberly is going to fill us in on all the different aspects of editors. You know, editors versus proofreaders, and you know, all the different levels. I think so. Anyways, so Michelle, I guess I'll let you start it off, and you can take it from there.
All right. Again, welcome. So glad that you're able to join us. How about you tell a little bit about yourself?
Well, like you, I am also an author, though that came in later. I was actually an editor long before I was an author, and I've been editing books since the early 2000s and have probably edited about 25 books because I do work for Comfort Publishing, which does, we focus primarily on, at Comfort, we primarily focus on non-fiction books, you know, in the genre, or tween kind of fantasy / you know, just tween books. And so they aren't my genre, which is paranormal murder mysteries. So I don't actually write for my own the publishing company I work for. I have another publisher for that. So I've had the experience from going from both ends. Plus I've been contributing editor, which is a little bit different as well. So you have different levels, like we were talking about. You have different types of editors, and a lot of people don't even realize that when they are, you know, looking for an editor. They just think of the term editor just means an all-encompassing type of word, and it really isn't. That's the biggest mistake that I think a lot of authors, especially new authors, make, and the reason for that is because you really need different types of editors for different stages in the process. For example, you have at a publishing company, you have like an acquiring editor who kind of looks over the different, you know, acquisitions, where they actually look at the different types of projects that are manuscripts that are coming in. They determine which ones look like they would be actually not only good books, there's many good books out there, but they also have to be profitable. And a lot of authors, especially newer authors, don't realize that these publishing companies, as wonderful as your book or your story might be, they have to look at the overall picture and how marketable you are as an author. So one of the things that I want to let y'all know is, first thing that you really have to, and y'all have done fairly well, you know, the thing that new authors need to really look at is their platform. And by that, I mean that you have a time where you, as you are writing your book, in the initial stages, as soon as you decide that you are wanting to go for, you know, more of a professional approach to your writing, then you really do need to work on getting a platform. And by that, you want to have a good Twitter account. You want to follow authors on Twitter, other publishing, you know, publishing companies, different types of interests that you are involved in, especially if it's a specific genre like mine, you know, with a paranormal murder mystery. So I look at a lot of the horror genre, a lot of the fantasy genre, supernatural, anything related to any of those categories, along with the general publishing industry. So you want to spend at least, if nothing else, 5 to 10 minutes a day. You know, you can fit it in, but put some time into adding and following especially other authors. Because you want to, as you are developing your own books and getting started, you want to have a nice variety of other authors that you have read. You know, you want to have a pool to draw from and say, well, that really works, but I don't really care for that approach. And it's not that any one approach is necessarily right or wrong, but you understand, you get more of an understanding what your particular style is, the more that you're exposed to.
Right.
And so when you look at King's approach versus Agatha Christie's versus Hitchcock's and all these different types of, these different types of, not necessarily Hitchcock as far as, book, but as far as his film work, is concerned. You can also draw from film too. What you see and what you visualize in your mind, what would be good for your book. So with acquisitions, they're going to look at this entire package that they're getting. Are they getting one book that it's one and done, and you've got, 10 followers on Twitter and, 100 friends on Facebook, and how much to offer, and you don't have a blog started, and you don't have to build those things up. While you are in the process of writing, you want to be building up a website, a blog. If nothing else, talk about what you're doing, what your experiences are, what you're studying, what are you researching. I had to research all sorts of things. I had to research ice fishing. Yes. And I researched about dive suits and hypothermic conditions. So, and those type of things is quirky things that you might have to find out about in order to write about something with some experience or understanding and actually sound like you might know what you're talking about. So, the way I think, and I think I could have probably done even a little better in my first book with the legal aspect, though I don't think it was completely off base. It was just not probably as accurate as it probably should have been. But with my second book, I spent a lot of time studying the legal process. I'm sorry, that is not my favorite thing to research.
Kim, it is just so ironic because actually Denise and I were chatting about new writers and the writing platform and what editors and publishers are looking for. Is it a requirement? I know you're saying it is, but well, that is a preference. But could a new writer come to comfort? Fantastic manuscript, no social media. Is there still a possibility at this day and time to be acquired? Really?
Yeah, and most of the times I would say no, unless they are well recognized. All right, like say a famous situation, which is the unusual one where someone just happened to hit it on the nail on the head. Now, what you can do is you can already have a book, maybe it's self-published, the 50 Shades of Grey, that sort of thing, where unknown person self-published on the internet and got tons of hits, tons of exposure, and they made it big and they got lucky. Of course, it was all about sex. So, but the point being is that is not the chance, the likelihood of that happening is like winning the lottery.
Wow.
And the reason being is in this day and age, you have to understand that every single book that a publisher is putting their money into, their efforts, they are putting their actual hard-earned, they're paying for employees, they're spending time, they're spending money in marketing and all those things. And if somebody comes in and they have done absolutely no groundwork, then that just shows the publishing company that person doesn't have enough drive to do something on their own. But if somebody comes in, well, that's the way the publishing company.
I get it. And I agree with you.
You have to look at it that they're looking at it to make money. They aren't looking at it to have a bunch of great books. Yes, that's part. They're going to automatically choose good books. They're not going to choose crappy books.
Right.
They're going to choose the books that they're going to be able to sell. Okay.
Wow.
And it's just the way it is. Now, if somebody spent a lot of time up front and they sit there and they actually have a great cover, or say maybe they don't even gotten that far. Maybe they don't have a great cover, but they have managed to at least create some sort of identity on the web. You can do a lot for free. Mm-hmm. You can get on, you can create a blog for free.
You can.
And you can relatively inexpensively, for what, $20, $30 a year or something like that, have a URL that's designated. Mine is KimberlyBrouillette.com.
Right.
So you can do some things very inexpensively without having to already have that publisher in your back pocket. Now, it's not that doesn't ever happen, but the likelihood, you just cannot count on it. The publisher is looking at the bottom line. If they're paying employees, the longer it takes for them to get you up and going, if they have to come up and help you get a Twitter account going or get you to get a blog going, and that's a requirement with our company up front. That has to be already arranged before we sign on the dotted line.
Wow.
I know that for a fact.
Okay.
So if you are sitting there and you don't have a website, you don't have a blog, you don't have any sort of Twitter activity and followers, you haven't got a Facebook presence, you know how simple that is to set some of that stuff up.
Right.
They've made no effort. So they're going to look at it like, okay, well, if they haven't done any enough effort on their own, what are they going to do when I'm sitting here paying them?
And I get that. I guess I'm playing devil's advocate because I had two new, aspiring writers come to me saying, I just want to write. Is there no way, remember the days in the ivory tower when the writer, they wrote by this fireplace and then they had a pub team that would market their books. But I guess that day is over. Yeah. But these people are extremely shy. And so for them to even get out here is a major deal.
Sure.
Well, I was just wondering, is that completely out the door now? But I see what you're saying. And
they're looking to make money. And if you're not going to do enough effort on your own, you don't have the heart in their eyes
to invest in yourself.
They're paying you. And if it takes like usually it takes a few months to get everything set up. You know how it does. So if they have to wait 3 to 4 months for all that stuff to be going, they're paying for you to not be selling any books.
I get it.
Okay. So that's the way it is. And so it's just, and almost every publishing company nowadays is going to have that as part of their contract. So you might as well,
just go ahead.
Writing the book in the first place, spend a little time every single day or every other day, or at least a few times a week, developing your platform. That is bottom line these days. Publishing companies don't make a ton of money. Right. And the way it works, a lot of it's kind of rigged anyway. New York Times bestseller list.
Yep.
Right.
Really, how can somebody be on the New York Times bestseller list before it even is released?
And they can only say it could have been 10 years ago they were on it, but they can always use that title. I found, you know what I'm saying? You're right. They can always say it.
What it is that the big house, all those big, distribution places are buying those books up first, and they're buying them by the however many thousands. And then they're turning around and trying to sell those books out. Now, what happens when Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, all these different places don't sell their books? They send them back.
That's right.
And then the publishing company has to buy them back. So if they're putting all this money up front, basically, so if they have a relationship, they're an authorized publishing company, just comfort is. Okay? So if they send those books and they get a huge order from, Books A Million or whatever, great. It's awesome. But what happens when the market, that author doesn't have a platform, doesn't have anything set up, they don't sell any books, they don't get the word out. You know how hard it is.
Yes.
Okay. So then they might get on a few author shows, which radio shows or something like that. Sure, that might help, but it's not going to sell tens and tens of thousands of books that they've got to order. So what happens is those publishing companies have to buy those books back. And they don't want to give that money back if they don't have to. And they got to buy it at a discount. So So they lose money. So you can see why it basically does come to the bottom line. Unfortunately, it's part of the system.
And
So,
I agree. With your company, what is your type? Are you an acquisition editor? I know you're development, but do you also handle acquisitions?
no, I don't handle acquisitions at all. That's handled by another person. I don't think she'd want me to give her name out, though. So, pardon me for not doing that.
That's okay.
But she, she handles that. We only publish. We're a small publishing company. Now, I actually don't primarily work on that side. I do more developmental editing,
which is
the acquisitions part. Now,
they're in, so they meet you, so you're like their favorite person. Right.
Well, yeah, some of us don't like me at all. In fact, there's some that we've actually turned down because of me, and it was because the books just the acquisitions editor didn't see what I saw or what I didn't see. Let's say that. Anyway, so it was like they were looking at it seriously and they were going to consider it. But when I got to it, I was like,
so walk us through that. Let's say we're new authors with your house and we're signed to you.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Basically, if that were, now I actually don't really work primarily on that side. As I mentioned, I primarily work on the Cabarrus magazine side.
Okay.
And in that end, I work more in sales and marketing. Okay. And I do some writing over there, but I primarily am in the other end. So with the editing side, I usually end up giving the book back to the author more often than not, believe it or not, if they're a first-time author, and telling them, listen, you got to fix this. There are certain things that are missing. I had one instance in particular that was just, I can't even believe they accepted the book in the first place, to be honest. It was in some of the earlier stages of the company. And you got through the first 2 pages of the book, and you still didn't have an idea who the characters were, what their names were, what they looked like, where they were going, where they were from, or what they were doing. You just knew they were riding a Jeep through the desert, and that was it. It's like, what? And it's like, why am I reading this? This is boring. So, and I said, I basically, I didn't even get through the first 5 pages, and I sent it back to the author, and I said, listen, I said, you have got to do some serious looking at this thing, and you've got to make sure that that the first 2 pages of this book are going to draw that person in, and the reader is going to not want to put it down the rest of the time. You cannot start off with a boring beginning. No. Do not do that. So, and they got to know at least some idea what's going on in the story, or they're,
so as a
lose interest.
So as a developmental editor, you help the author structure or mold the story. So what is the difference between a developmental and a content editor?
That's different words for the same thing.
It is the same.
Pretty much. Okay. Yeah, this is just different. A content editor. I call myself a content editor all the time.
All right.
Developmental and content are basically, you are helping the author. I call it finding the holes in the story.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Finding the things that are missing. For instance, there was one author that I worked with, and I mentioned to you yesterday that the beginning of her story kind of reminded me of the beginning of that other book that I was talking about, where you had a couple pages where the person's just sitting there wandering, and you don't understand what the heck is going on. And so it was kind of actually.
That's me every day. I'm sorry. Just me in life, but okay.
But in a book, you don't want the first 2 pages.
True.
Okay, so I told him, I said, but the problem was it was kind of necessary. Okay. So I thought, okay, well, what can we do here? So I found out it was a sequel to a previous book, which I did not work on.
Okay.
And this one I actually did freelance. It was not with Comfort. It was something else. And so what I did was I basically found out that there was something that had not been discussed in the previous book and had not been discussed in the next book. It had been alluded to in the previous book. And that was that this woman had become vampire.
Oh, okay.
I mean, not a vampire, a werewolf, excuse me. That she had been running through the woods and had been bitten by a werewolf, but they had just talked about it in the previous book. They never really showed it happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, this could be a nice little yin-yang thing going on here. And so what if we have this exciting aspect that we plug into to kind of duel with the boring part?
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, what if we take this situation? We have the girl running through the woods she's running away from the werewolf. She's trying to get away, but she still gets caught and she still gets bitten and she gets turned into a werewolf, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have that situation, which is much more exciting than somebody walking to a river. And then they happen to see a woman or a girl that's, going down the river and they save them. Okay, so, and you have this yin-yang thing going on where you have the person that's running for their life and they get basically killed and turned into a werewolf, and you have someone that is going through a boring situation, but then they save someone. So it was kind of like a back and forth thing. So it balanced it out much better. And she said that did it. That helped so much.
Good.
So that's a good example of something that I would do.
Very cool. Very cool. So, let's break it down, because I know many independent authors, they have everything on their plates. They're choosing the editors, the artists, the graphic artists, all of this. Mm-hmm. So they would need, when I say they, me, would need to know what to look for. So there are developmental or content editors, line editors, right. And what else would probably be needed if you're self-publishing or producing?
Well, you can have different aspects. If you're talking about an independent who's basically doing it on their own,
right,
and they aren't dealing directly with a publishing company, but they hope to one day.
Yes.
Then they need to understand that the better that they are perceived when they choose whatever facet that they're needing to work on, mm-hmm. the more professional that result is, the more likely that publisher is going to take that book if they want to have it. Now, some people have found that they are doing really well on their own and they keep it being indie, mm-hmm. And that's fine. But it just depends on what you're pursuing and how much control you want.
Okay.
And the other thing is how, they might have the exposure. So it may be a financial too.
Okay.
Okay. But if you have like a publishing company, they'll have like a project editor who is actually overseeing not only the, kind of like putting all the pieces together. Like they will make sure that they've got the person who's doing the cover has got their thing coming in. You have your person working on, the galley is, the person that's making any revisions, making sure it's getting the line editors doing the proofreading, that sort of thing. Proofreading and editing, to me, when you think of proofreading. Do not think of editing. Editing is a deeper process. So,
what's the difference? Or what are the little differences?
Well, a lot of people kind of mold, kind of just put proofreaders in with editors. And it's part of it. It's an aspect of it. But it is not the primary aspect of an editor. An editor does make sure that the entire project is coming together, in whatever aspect that they're working on. So, like for me as a developmental editor, because I get really close to the work. A lot of times when that finally has caught on to what, any keys that I've said, and sometimes I will send it back to them and they'll have it for another 3 to 6 months. Because I will basically tell them, listen, I've had many times where, I had one woman that she asked me to edit her book, and then almost every single first word of every single sentence was either she or he or it. She did this. She said this. He said this. She did this. Blah, 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 blah. And I was like, listen, your story isn't bad, but you need to rework so that you've got some mixture in your wording. it's just boring to have somebody say, she thought this, she did this, she did this, she thought this, you know, he said that, she said that to him, and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put a little bit more creativity in your words.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that necessarily the story is bad. It's just that you have to tell it like a story, so that you will actually, the reader will actually want to continue reading.
All right.
If it becomes too repetitive, too redundant, things like that, that can turn the reader away. Doesn't matter how good the story is and later on, but especially in those first few.
Got to capture them, right?
Yeah, you want to capture
in that first.
Well, and you want to keep
sentence, really, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you want to get a lot of people just think about telling the story. They don't think of how they're telling the story.
That's true. Or info dumping.
Right.
I used to think,
I hate that.
So much for the info dumping.
I call it a laundry basket. The guy with red hair and blue eyes and red and freckles and dark skin, and and he's wearing a t-shirt and he's got a pair of jeans on, and it's like, I call it a laundry basket. Think of it like a laundry basket. It's like you just have a bunch of information all at one time, and you're not showing anything individually, and it's all getting lumped in together. So what I call it free peppering. So peppering is where I will, when I'm writing, for instance, I will mention, like, if somebody's looking somewhere, I'll talk about their blue eyes or their brown eyes or whatever. Or if, that somebody strokes their golden hair or their whatever, so, it's you put in the descriptives as you can. You don't just sit there, and you might put a couple together, but I wouldn't put them all in one sentence like some people do.
Right.
So that's another good thing.
Great information.
Sure.
Yeah. I have a question. Since we have 10 minutes.
Go ahead.
What do you say to the author, the first-time author who thinks they don't need editing?
Well, let me tell you this. Before I will take on any project, I will ask them point blank, do you really want an editor or do you want a proofreader? Because there is a difference, and I'll explain the difference, and I'll say, do you want to make your work better, or do you want to just make it your work? Do you want this? So, the thing is that you can't see everything. I can't see everything in my own books. I have beta readers. I have editors. And, we mentioned before, yesterday, what is their biggest mistake? And that was trying to edit my own book. I tried to put my book down for 3 or 4 months and go back and try to edit it. I ended up with some bad reviews, and it was all because of mistakes, typos. It wasn't that my story was bad. Yeah. Later on, I'm getting 5-star. I haven't gotten anything lower than like a 5-star or 4-star review in the past, year and a half, 2 years, almost 2 years. But it's because I went back and I said, nope, I realized my mistakes, and I had got an editor, and I had her go through it, and, and I realized that I have my limitations. And a lot of that has to do with that you are so close to your work. Mm-hmm. You can't see everything. You can't see what everybody else sees. And so even as an author, whether you're an editor, whatever, and as a content editor, I still have the same issues even when I'm working with someone. I might work with someone for a year on their book, because sometimes I might send it back to them and they'll work on it for 3 or 4 months. Then they come back to me, and say, here, this is what I did. And I'll go back through that, and then I'll find something else, and I'll send it back to them and say, hey, go through these, And so it's a longer process with the developmental, because I actually can work with somebody as they're in the process of writing the book. They might get to a certain point in it, and then they want to see, am I on the right track? Rather than, and I do this with my editor. I started doing this with my editor on the second book, because when I got through, about 20 chapters, my books are fairly long. I would send it to her and say, can you check this out? How is it coming? Anything I'm kind of lacking on? Anything that I'm totally off base? Can you give me some guidance if you think of anything's, not on par? And that way, when I go to the future part of that story, once I'm working on that, I already know about those other things that they've come and told me about so that I avoid them the rest of the time. Mm-hmm. The other thing is they might make a suggestion, say, hey, have you thought about this? What about enhancing this? What about adding a character here? Having a protagonist, antagonist thing kind of going on here. What if you want to do this or whatever? And so that can totally change the end of your story. So what if you spend all this time, and this happened to me, because there was a point in the story in the book 1 where I was like, we got to a certain point and I was like, this doesn't work. And that we just literally cut out about 10 chapters, came back, and it had characters we had killed off that we didn't kill off in the long run. It was like, we don't need to do that. Why are we making ourselves work harder? Let's not do that. So I was going to have to replace that character anyway. So why replace that character? Anyway. So basically, there's a lot of things that you can do with a developmental editor in the meantime. And then that line editor comes in more at the end. That's more of the proofreading, making sure your grammatics.
Oh, okay.
And more that your punctuation, that your story flow, that it's all, you're not doing a bunch of repetitive words and things like that. It's not that your other editor can't catch that, but that's kind of where you get to the final stage. And if your content and editor has been working with you for a year on a project, and they've been reading over this thing several times,
yes,
you can see why there would be a problem having that same person be necessarily a line editor.
Right.
And you better have a thick skin.
Even
if you're working, if you're working with it, if the content editor says, out, scratch, out, get rid of, well, you better have a thick skin and go, okay. I'd be crying.
I had some that have just not had any. I try not to be mean. I really try not to be, chewy. I got some bad news for you. I gotta redo this part. This is just not gonna work. But that's why I felt really bad about that one guy that had the people going through the desert. It's like, okay, I am sitting here and I am bored to death and I don't have a clue why.
Where are we going through the desert?
I don't know what's going on. So there's a lot of things that that editors are able to do to really help make that your work even better. Think of them as the polishers.
Yeah.
They're the polishers.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that help you bring out the shine in your work.
Yeah.
Perfect.
The meats and potatoes.
So,
it's the meats and potatoes. The good stuff.
Yeah. Well, no, hopefully not the meats and potatoes in there. They're the ones that add all the seasoning to it to make it really good.
Oh, y'all are making me hungry.
Yeah.
I'm hungry. Sounds great. Well, you've given some great information, Kimberly. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This really should be more than just one segment. It's just so much that you could help not only new authors, just all authors, because we don't know that side. Yeah. We really don't. We need that side. We just don't know that side. Yeah. So thank you.
It really has been beneficial having already been an editor, and I don't know why I didn't get into the writing side any more than I did. I did articles. I did write some articles, but I really didn't get into writing a book at all until I actually was contributing editor for a book for Pamela Tolan. It's called Abrams' Journey Quest for the Man in the Stars. And that was in 2005. And that was the first one I was contributing editor where I actually wrote some segments in the book where I enhanced the story. And, like for instance, talking about the holes, when she was writing the story, she had Angel meet Abraham. And she just she didn't write any descriptors or anything. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, if you meet an angel, what is the first thing somebody's going to ask? What did he look like?
Yeah.
Yep.
You know,
Right.
Yep.
what did the angel look like? Were they not? Okay,
Right.
so not only what they say, but what did they look like?
Yeah.
How tall was he? Did he have a halo? I don't know. Did he have wings? You know, whatever. But you have, you know, you want to draw that reader in. You want them to share in the experience going on in the story. So that includes visualization, it includes the senses, it includes thoughts, inner dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I use inner dialogue a lot in my books because I've got a serial killer. That person,
There you go. Yeah.
that person might be thinking one thing
Mm-hmm.
and saying something completely different.
Definitely.
So unless you say what they're thinking, the reader's not going to know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a little clue as to who that serial killer is, because I don't say who the serial killer is until the end of the second book.
Yeah.
Wow. Perfect.
So I lead up to it, and I have little clues along the way, but I don't actually come out and say it until the end of the second book. So don't jump to the end of my second book now.
Like, let me go to the Well,
It'll be like Christmas.
it looks like we're getting low on time,
Okay.
Denise, and so
Yeah.
Kimberly,
Well,
wow,
yeah.
you've helped me.
yeah.
Lots of information.
Thanks, Kimberly, for being with us. And we'll probably get cut off like we did on our last video.